Welcome back to FinTalk, brought to you by Vermic. I'm Jawad Akhtar, your host. Today we're going to talk about Basel. That's your favourite topic. So with me I have Steve Nagle, Andrew Sylvester, part of my team. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
So I'm obviously a regulator SME, part of your team. Been at Vermic for about 8 years now. Currently covering liquidity mainly, but obviously have to make it a bit more diverse than that.
Yeah,
we've got quite a
we
small
moved on
team,
from Basel
so
3.
Basel 3 coming in. There's a lot to cover. So yeah.
Yep, Andrew Sylvester, regulatory product analyst, specializing subjects, credit risk, and capital.
So obviously we've now finally got the CP, the PS. Finally got the CPS. Arrived in September with a whole load of other stuff as well. So it wasn't just one PS. It was about quite a few documents that we had to go through. I'm going to start with Steve, because I know, Steve, you analysed the first PS back in, feels a while ago now, December 23. Wow, that's December 23 on market risk and op risk and CVA. From what we've seen so far in the PS now, is there any changes from the PS in December?
Short answer is no, really.
It's good.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, not really. No, the CVA and market risk, pretty much nothing. Made a few corrections and stuff. For CVA, they've just adjusted the formula slightly to take care of the fact that the start date has changed to 2027 now. So that initial kind of start date of 1st of July has moved, and they've just made the formula look slightly different, but it's essentially the same. Nothing market risk. And operational risk, we've kind of seen just some corrections. There's the annotated template was a little bit out of line with the annex template, and there was an open to one, the annotated template that's now been corrected, and the validations, taxonomy type stuff that goes along with it has been corrected accordingly. So.
Yeah, so I know we spoke about op risk last year. Now that's been a year ago. So that's finally been corrected. So we've seen that. When you talk about the adjustments to calculation, that's just the transitional, right? From 5 to 4?
Yeah, so this is the transitional option that they gave us in PS 1723. Yeah, so beforehand it was just fully include or exclude the legacy excluded trades. And then they give us an extra option so that you can allow them in on a sliding scale basis now. So yeah.
Before I come to you, Andrew, I do want to touch upon one of the papers that we received in September was the SDDT. I know it's still a CP. It's not the final rules. Anything that we need to kind of make sure, because I know that the go live now is changed to it's go live for SDDT is now 27.
27, yeah. January 27, yeah.
And there's an interim capital period.
Yeah.
And that lasts for what's that?
That's a year. So yeah, obviously the Basel 3.1 kicks in January 26. The SDDT doesn't kick in until January 27. So there's that year interim capital regime option. So yeah, if companies want to opt into the SDDT regime, then for that year they can also opt to go into the interim capital regime as well. So that just means they don't adopt the Basel 3.1 regulation in the meantime. So you don't have to do two jobs.
So for firms that are opting into SDDT for 1 year, they will basically be on the current regime that we are on right now.
Yeah,
for 1 year. So for us, we're effectively supporting 3 products.
Yeah,
that's the kind of pain we have to deal with. Okay, so I know there's a close date of the CP. I think it's this year. I think it's end of this year.
December, 12th of December,
12th December, that's right. So we urge firms to kind of, make sure that they, if they're looking to go into that regime, then, make sure they respond to that CP. Just in terms of the capital savings as well, I know there's a capital stack diagram that we'd seen. Ultimately, there's not really much savings. There's barely 0.5% of saving in terms of when we look at the capital stack. What's really the benefit then? It's just operational.
Kind of operational. There's the capital stack is a simpler calculation, so it's easier to calculate. And there's some relief on some of the reporting requirements. So they don't have to report CVA or CCR. Market risk is just done on a non-trading book standardized credit risk calculation. And some of the Pillar 2A and ICAP are simpler or less frequent.
Yeah, it's much simpler, isn't it?
Yeah,
and the frequency as well. I mean, we definitely saw the operational burden reduced when we saw the PS from last year, where it stated that firms don't need to report the AMMs, or one of the AMMs don't need to. The NSFR simplified got removed, so those changes were effective in June last year.
This year.
This year, that's right. Yeah.
It's all a blur.
Yeah. It is all a blur. It's just too many CPs and PSs going on. It's not where do we start? Right, Andrew, credit risk. Right, that's you. You've been waiting for this. I know you have. All right.
Everyone's been waiting.
Everyone's been waiting for this. Yeah, it's true.
It was June, wasn't it?
It was supposed to be June. Yeah. We were supposed to be June. Then the elections. We had an election. We got a new government. A lot's happened since we last did a podcast, wasn't it? So come to Andrew. I know everyone's been waiting for this policy statement because it has all the stuff about credit risk and capital. I know you're going to reel it off to me because there's so much that you have. I know you have a list, so I'll let you crack on and reel it off to me.
Yeah, apologies in advance. I mean, my brain could only absorb so much. So we're going to start off with property exposure class, so real estate exposure class, because that was the biggest area of pushback, shall we say, from the industry. So in regards to that, we have the PRA have removed the 100% risk weight floor for regulatory commercial real estate exposures to corporates, including SMEs, where repayment is not materially dependent on cash flows from the property. The PRA have also removed the provisions excluding specific types of property from the definition of residential real estate. The PRA's expectation is that firms only treat property as residential real estate where it could be used as standard residential dwelling, thus on the face of it excluding things like holiday lets, care homes, or purpose-built student accommodation. Unless these are capable of being resold as a standard residential dwelling in the event of the obligor's default. The PRA have also exempted self-build loans from the finished requirement of the definition to avoid these exposures from being classified as other real estate.
Yeah. So this was the biggest change that we saw by far.
Next point is a
I know
doozy.
you got loads going on.
Next point's a doozy. The PRA is sticking with value origination, but have now introduced a revaluation backstop of 5 years. And actually it becomes 3 years if the loan is more than 2.6 million or 5% of the own funds of the firm. The PRA have also simplified downward revaluation requirements by only requiring firms to revalue properties if they estimate that the market value of the property has decreased by more than 10% from the recorded value of the last valuation event. And finally, on real estate, we got the PRA have clarified that an exposure secured by a second charge can be treated as a regulatory real estate exposure if certain requirements are met, including where there is an intermediate charge held by another lender.
And I remember this being a very contentious point. Okay. Good. What else have we got?
Okay. Let's go on to retail exposure test.
Yeah.
So the PRA have now reversed their proposals to include undrawn commitments in the assessment of the 0.88 million threshold, reverting back to only considering the total amount owed.
Okay.
So all that hard work we did developing that whole new retail test
Yeah.
goes out the window.
Don't need it anymore.
Next.
Okay.
Equities. So as people are aware that there was going to be a new risk weight of 400% where the equity is exposure to venture capital. It turns out that defining what is venture capital was a bit trickier than they first thought. So they've kind of rode back on that, and they're now saying it's to exposures to high risk exposures. And then they define what a high risk is a business which is less than 5 years old. Again, that makes you wonder, okay, yeah, 5 years old, but what does that exactly mean per se? So then they go on to say, well, okay, we've set out how to determine the age of a business in a supporting document, the SS10/13. Off-balance sheet items. A couple of points to make here. The credit conversion factor, the CCF, for other commitments has been reduced from 50% to 40%, which aligns with the BCBS, except in respect to exposures which are to UK residential mortgage commitments.
Okay, so you can't apply the 40% if you have more UK mortgages.
Yeah.
Okay. Fine.
And then other transaction-related contingent items that do not have the character of credit substitutes, for example, trade finance, trade letters of credit, which were previously split based upon maturity, have now been uniformly aligned to a CCF of 20% instead of 50%.
I know you got more.
We've got more.
You got more. Come on then. Let's hear them.
So the PRA have included a new simplified and expanded definition of an SME, and it's now using annual turnover based on the approach used in accounting consolidation, which permits more exposures to benefit from the lower SME risk weights. And the PRA have now defined a formal hierarchy for firms to follow when assigning exposures to exposure classes. So Article 112. And where an exposure meets the criteria for more than one exposure class, it must assign it to the exposure class that's highest in the table. Furthermore, I'm a bit sad to see it go. The PRA have decided to remove the short-term credit assessment exposure class because that treatment will now be handled separately depending on whether it falls under institutional or corporate exposure class.
Are you sad to see it go?
I'm a little bit sad.
I don't know. It was an area that was contentious, right? What is short term? It's short term under a year. It's short term 3 months. You know, it was definitely something that was a bit yeah.
That opens up a whole kind of worms when we talk about
it was a bit open. Yeah.
You know, how to what credit risk assessments to use, short term,
right, yeah.
long term, issuer.
Well, exactly. So I'm not too surprised or I'm quite
the
pleased.
EBA retaining it, so it just caused a bit of a divergence.
Well, that's exactly. Yeah,
I've got 2 points which are kind of related to the credit risk mitigation aspect. The first is that the PRA have reworked Article 220, which calculates the exposure value of FSTs under a master netting agreement using financial collateral comprehensive method. They've made it clearer now because it was a little bit ambiguous. And they've also corrected the error that I had noticed. I'm sure most people had noticed that error in calculating the gross exposure of the master netting agreement.
Okay.
Those
yes.
absolute value brackets.
I remember you raising that. Yeah. It's
And you start trying to compare that formula to like the BCBS formula, and you're going, hang on, something's not right here. So you think, okay, it's going to get corrected, and they've corrected it. They have now corrected it.
Good.
And then another thing, which no one seemed to was calling out, was the change to Article 235, calculating the risk weight exposure amounts under the risk weight substitution method, because in the CP, the formula implied that you're going to calculate like a weighted average risk weight and apply it to both the collateral and the exposure, which did seem a bit odd, but that's what it kind of implied, because the formula was saying this is you're calculating the risk weight, not the risk weighted exposure amount. Anyway, so they've now come back, and then they've now clarified that article, and it's clearly saying it's you're calculating the risk weight for the covered and then a separate risk weight for the uncovered. So it's basically the same as it was before, pretty much.
Yeah, that's the frustration, wasn't it? Was changed it and then brought it back to what it was.
Right now, so that was basically the standardized approach to credit risk changes. And now, if we look at the Pillar 2A capital requirements, because the feedback that we're getting is that we're doing away with the infrastructure support factor, we're doing away with the SME supporting factor, and what they were offering in return, people were saying, well, that's not going to really help us. It's not going to offset it enough. So now the PRA have introduced 2 firm-specific adjustments to reduce Pillar 2A capital requirements, because it's just to offset those high risk-weight exposures. And then finally, onto the output floor. Again, just 2 more points to mention. There's a new permissions regime being introduced to allow UK subsidiaries of groups headquartered overseas, whose parent entities are subject to the output floor on a consolidated basis in their home jurisdictions, to apply to the PRA to be treated as an international subsidiary under the output floor regime, and therefore be exempt from applying the output floor at the level of the UK subsidiary. Permission is granted if the PRA is satisfied that there is public commitment to implement the output floor in the home jurisdiction. And secondly, that the output floor now comes with what's called a technical adjustment to handle differing treatments of accounting provisions under the credit risk standardized approach and IRB approach.
Fine. There's a lot, though.
There's a lot.
There's a lot. And a lot of that, obviously, we have to rework back into our product. So I know there's a lot of elements of rework. And some of the stuff that we need. Now that we've got clarification, we can kind of move forward on that. Before I kind of talk about other points, there's taxonomy. The taxonomy points. We have the second draft. I know there's still feedback being requested on that. Anything you guys is worth pointing out at this point?
Well, I have been looking at the validation rules, for example, and yes, I can see some have been corrected, but there also seems to be quite a lot which still remain wrong, unfortunately. So we are, I'm writing to the PRA, to the to the email address that they publish on the taxonomy feedback on a kind of template by template basis, just to point out, I believe these are errors. Sometimes they respond very quickly, and sometimes it's just, you're waiting for it. But simply example is that for whatever reason, they got validation rules which are to do with summing certain rows, where those column is a percentage column.
Yeah, I know you've been looking at the validations as well.
And the output floor, the CA2. There are some validation rules there which again don't seem correct in my opinion. So we've written to the PRA, just waiting to hear back on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is still a draft. I think what people need to realize, this is still a draft taxonomy. I mean, at point of recording, this is still a draft taxonomy. The actual final taxonomy doesn't come out. Was it first of Q1 2025 under the regulatory initiative grid, which is what they've announced it there. So we know it's going to come out in Q1 2025, the final one. So there are still changes that we would expect to happen. So if people are seeing those kind of feedbacks, it's worth kind of pushing that over.
Yeah, it's definitely worth banks analysing the taxonomy themselves, especially the validation rules part of it. There does seem to be some errors in there that we've picked up, and perhaps banks can do some testing themselves as well and send off to the PRA to let them know if they've made any mistakes, which is quite a usual thing for it to happen. So
yeah, and it's quite important that, because unless that channel is open or communicated, we won't have a kind of a perfect product. There's a lot. We've covered a lot. What are points that firms should be looking at kind of now going into next year now, with all the changes coming up, all the CPs, all the PSs that we've seen? What advice are you going to give to firms?
Well, I think the first thing firms should be doing is, performing an impact assessment. What's changed, and how's that going to, then trickle down through the governance of the organisation, processes, systems, controls, etc. Another important point I would say is, well, we've been running workshops for the past 12 months on Basel 3.1, and I hear they've been very popular.
Yeah.
So backed by popular demand, we are going to be continuing on with those workshops, and those are going to be updated to include now these latest changes. So if any one of our clients is interested in having a workshop, they should get in contact with us.
Yeah. Steve, any words of wisdom?
Yeah, I mean, it's just that decision making for banks. There's options as to which style of reporting you choose. Whether it's if you're small enough to choose the SDDT, if you're not, then for CVA and market risk, you've got a simpler method or increasingly complicated method. So it's whether or not the capital savings are big enough to make the complexity worthwhile. So banks are going to have to analyse that themselves and see what the savings are and whether or not it's worth implementing a more complicated regulated reporting style rather than just going for the simplified ones.
Yeah, and it's a good point you both raised. We've got two potential regimes that are running. Without doing an impact analysis, you're never going to know. Yes, it may reduce your operational burden, but actually, there may not be any capital gain. I know the capital stack says 0.5%, but is that 0.5% enough for you to do that kind of level work? To do an RDR, you still need to kind of produce an NSFR, so it's kind of counterintuitive sometimes. But it's very important that they kind of look at impact assessments, workshops. Obviously, we're going to be updating the workshops based on the PSs that we've seen and all the data items that we've discussed and obviously you've highlighted today. We'll look to kind of capture that into more sessions with clients that we're working with. So I'd like to thank you both. It's been a lot to capture. There's a lot of information there. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jawad.